In this video, we're going to show you guys how to install Hortitech rolling bench systems in an indoor facility. We're going to go through layout, foundation, base assembly, table tray assembly, the whole 9 yards from start to finish of this room being built. We're going to show you how the systems are supposed to function, the necessary aisle spacing, and how to complete this so when you purchase our benches, you can confidently install them. Our first step in the process is going to be doing the layout. Now, the layout in the room is either going to be based on the room's dimensions or where your lights are hanging. In our situation, we're going to be building them based on the room's dimensions because the lights are sized to the room. So we actually can get the pole off center. So we measure in the room, we're going to make a mark center. From that point, we're going to go in there and we're going to show you how to determine what your table leg widths are going to be, the aisle spacing in between your benches, and the minimums you need off the walls to make sure that your benches are in the right spot and that you have proper room to do your work. So putting together your base assembly is how we actually are determining our layout in the room. So this is the base assembly that's going to hold the roll bar, which is pretty much the foundation for your table. Now these base assemblies, which we'll get to in the next bit of the video, get put together ahead of time and then brought in and installed into the concrete. So on a 4-foot table, our base assembly is going to be 30 inches wide outside of the 2-inch square stock to outside of the 2-inch square stock. And you'll see the lines in the room that we put in here are 30 inches outside to outside. Since this room had 3 4-foot by 30-foot tables, that's the total length of the tabletop, we chalked our lines out in the room 30 inches apart, and using our Hortitech guide for aisle spacing, it'll determine what your minimum spacing needs to be in between these tables. In our case, it was 25.5 inches. So you'll refer to the chart, and the chart will tell you the distance you need in between your tables. So we got these set at our 30 inches outside to outside. We found out that our table spacing was 25.5 inches, this is our aisle. So when the tables are pushed to either side, this will be your aisle that you have to walk through. So we mimicked that, and we did our next table here, our next aisle here, 25.5 inches, and then our final table here. So all of our lines are now chalked for each of our tables, and now we're working our way back to show you where the table base assemblies are going to end. Now that our lines are all ran out for the length of our tables, we squared off our lines to show where our base assemblies are going to stop. Now, the base assembly is going to stop 2 foot shorter than the total table height. So in this case, our table height was 30 feet long. So our actual base assembly distance is going to be 26 feet long because the base assembly is going to fall 2 feet short of the total table length. So since the table length is 30 feet, this end is going to be 2 foot off the end of the table length. So our client in this situation wanted to have 6 inches of room from the wall to the edge of his table. So for us to get that distance applied correctly, we pulled 30 inches from the outside of the wall to the edge of our table base assembly. Then from that point, we're going to be pulling 26 feet, which is the total length of the table, minus 4 feet for the overhang, and we're chalking our line on the opposing end. Once we're done with that, we're going to go through and we're going to determine what the spacing is of our legs to support the roll bar for the table. Our next step in the process is to put together our table base assemblies. And the table base assembly will consist of 2 legs, 2 feet, and 1 crossbar. Now, you want to pre-assemble these before installing them by taking the crossbar, sliding it over top of the table leg, and self-tapping the screw in. Once that's completely assembled, and we have our layout in our room done with our spacing, all we're going to do is drop the table legs into the table feet and set them in place. Now, in this room, following our layout given you in your instruction manual, you'll notice what these distances need to be on center for the entire span of the table assembly. So for this distance, we had 30 feet, so we've got 5 sets of legs per the table, so they're less than 8 feet apart. We got our stuff all lined out on center and we got it all laid out, and now we're going through and we're marking out our plates and we're gonna start assembling them into the ground and get them all anchored before we move on to the next step. To set the pitch of the tables, we started by establishing how much pitch we wanted to create for the length of the table that we have. For this situation, we decided to do a 1% grade. So it was a 30-foot table, which ended up being 360 inches. 1% of 360 is 3.6 inches. We rounded that up to 4 inches. So on the first set of legs, we pulled it up 4 inches, which is 4 inches of leg telescoping out of the foot. So we telescoped it 4 inches out, and then 2 inches below, 1 inch centered, we drilled a 1/4 inch hole and we put our 1/4 inch by 3 inch bolt through the hole and secured it. We ran it level to the other side, made sure that this was perfect, and then we pulled string line, which you can see here on this next step. We're in mid progress getting this done, to the end where we want the water to drain. So the water is obviously going to drain to the lower end of the slope, which is the far end of the room. So we telescoped this out 4 inches. We can only telescope these out enough so that no less than 4 inches of contact is being made from the leg to the foot. So if this leg is 16 inches, we can only telescope, my apologies, the foot. If the foot is only 16 inches, the leg can only telescope 12 inches out of the 16-inch foot, so that there is 4 inches of contact still between the leg and the foot to have this bolt go through. Then we run our string line down to the bottom, and every single one of the legs intermediately going down the line is going to be pulled up to the height of the string line. So every single one will slowly be getting lower until we get to the very end, so that the pitch is even going down the whole room. And we're gonna repeat that obviously for every table in the room. And once that's finished, we're gonna get through and we're gonna install the roll bars. So I'm going to show you guys a quick method that I like to use to square off my feet to my string lines. So I always bring a big old framing square. So I use a 24-inch framing square. And because I have these lines already chalked out, I like to use my framing square. I rest it against the inside above the weld. And I make sure that each of my framing square lines is parallel, meeting each of these guys. I'll take it off, come out. I like to get my Sharpie in there, pre-mark as good as you can all of my locations for my sleeve anchors. So once I have that established, I'll repeat that on the other side and for the entire room. I'll pull off, and this is gonna get really loud, so we're gonna cut the microphone on here, and I'm gonna show you guys how we do this. To put together your tabletops, you're always going to start with our side rails. Now, our side rails are these aluminum pieces, which we'll show you a close-up of outside, that have a hole drilled dead in the center, 4 foot on center, and you will have your end pieces that are supplied. Now, if you had an even length table, 32 feet long, something of that range, something divisible by 8, you might only get 8 foot long pieces, but if you have a table that's not evenly divisible by 8, you're gonna end up getting a cut piece. Now, you will start your table from either side. You could start with your 8 foot sections from the back or the front. It really won't make a difference, but just pick one side and keep it consistent so that all of your trellis poles end up in the same space in your room. Starting with your 8 foot pieces, we pre-assemble them out out of the room or in the room, whatever's convenient for you, by installing our hat channel, which is our cross member. Our cross member is what's actually going to support the tray, and it's going to sit on top of the roll bar. So the hat channel gets installed 16 inches on center down the length of the side rail. And you'll see some gaps where we skipped them because when we were putting them together, we can't get the ones that split in between the two side rails, so we come in and we install those after. And we also skip anywhere that lands above one of our base assemblies, and we skip those because those will get a piece of 1.5 inch square stock. And once we show you how to install the anti-flip bracket, that'll make sense because it has a different installation method that you cannot use the hat channel for installing. So when we put them together, we knew that some of our members were going to land at that point, so we skipped them. If you put all of your pieces together, 16 on center, and install them, more than likely you will have to take one of them out and replace it with a piece of 1.5 inch square stock when you're going to build the structure. So we started from the back. We put our stock members together, 16 on center, installed it. On each side of the member, we install a splice which sits in between these members, so we pre-install that. We secure everything from the bottom with a self-tapping screw. If you look underneath here, we have a self-tapping screw at the joint of each of the side rails, and we also have a self-tapping screw at the end of each of our pieces of hat channel that are our cross members for our trays. So that's what keeps these engaged, keeps them from sliding out, and we put those at every single point. Get back on top. We're gonna square our table off. We're gonna true it up, so that way we know that it's square to the base assemblies. And then we're gonna install our cross members in line with those base assemblies, and we'll show you that in the next step. So now I'm going through and I'm truing up my roll bars that are underneath. And I wanna do that, and I wanna have everything true before I go ahead and I start finishing my tabletop assembly. So I'm making sure that I start with my first roll bar, and I wanna make sure that that roll bar is 24 inches from the outside of my cross member to the outside of the roll bar. And I wanna make sure that the roll bar is completely pressed against this outside edge so it can't move, because then I know it's square against the whole face of this table base assembly. So I'm gonna go through, I'm gonna measure to the end, and I'm actually gonna use some quick grips, and I'm gonna get everything cinched to the outside edge, and I'm gonna repeat the process on the other side. Our cross members are 1.5 inch square stock. These cross members that I was referring to that needed to go in line with your table base assemblies are 1.5 inch square stock. The rest of them are the hat channel. We discussed that. These get put in after the fact. You just slide them into place. You can see I've got my base assembly here, and I'm just going to give this a nudge, get it into place. I'm gonna roughly line it up with either face. You could go on the inside face or the outside face. The most important thing is that it's in line with this face. Now, I'm going to assemble our anti-flip bracket, which I'm going to grab. J-braked piece of sheet metal here. And when I go to install this, I've got my roll bar already completely against the right side of my base assembly. So I have the roll bar completely against here, and I've got the entire table pushed that direction as well. So my right roll bar is completely to the right of my table base assembly, and I've taken the entire top and I have maxed it out. So what I mean maxed it out is I have pushed it to its terminal width. So that's the farthest it can go. And that means that it is completely flush with the outside of my table base assembly. So I've got the outside of my table base assembly completely flush on each of my pieces going down the line. I made sure that the length off the edge is accurate at the 2 feet. I squared it up completely. Now I've installed my cross member. This bracket is going to install against this bar. So every time this rolls back and forth, this bar is going to travel with the table. But this bracket is going to actually snug this bar against there every time it goes to the edge. So it's going to serve two purposes. It's going to keep the table from flipping when it's completely against one side, and it's going to keep it true. It's going to keep it lined up when it's rolling back and forth. So we're going to show you how to put that on with a couple self-tapping screws here. So we're just going to recap our anti-flip brackets. So we started at the very end here, and we alternated at every base assembly. So I started all the way back with the same thing I told you in the last video, or last scene. And I started with my bracket pushing against my roll bar with the inside of the side rail, flush with the outside of the table base assembly. And I skipped this section. I repeated it here. And then I skipped the next section, and I repeated it on the end. Now, obviously, you're seeing a bracket on these sections, so you're probably saying, well, you didn't skip it. That bracket is used for the opposing side. So now we repeat that process. So now you can see how we have support. So the bracket itself now, on this side, I started on the opposing side as well. We got our bracket here. So, oops. And the bracket on the other end. And those brackets are smacking this bar every time we come in here, and it's pushing that bar where it's supposed to be. And it goes to the opposing side, and it does the same thing. Carries over, hits there. And the whole purpose is to keep these brackets of the anti-flip. So all that weight and all that pressure is being put on that bracket when it's coming this direction and keeping it from going anywhere. The tray assembly should always be dry fitted before you go into gluing them all together to make sure that you have the cross members in the right spots and to make sure that your trays are fit and there's no issues with the tray sizing, because those are usually going to be shipped directly from the manufacturer. So in these two benches that we already pre-did, we've got those completely dry fitted. We know that all of our sizing worked well. We know that we have support at all of our joints. You might have to move some of your cross members when you're installing to make sure that one of these lips of this hat channel actually land on the joint connections, because you want support at those joints. Otherwise, when you put a plant or a pot on there, you could actually break the seam. So we want to make sure that if you need to do it ahead of time, you can shift your cross member to support the edge of this seam. Once you have it completely dry fitted, we're going to start by putting one of your end caps into the drain, the tray. Make sure that it's recessed completely in. You want to snug it all the way to the back. Make sure that we're good to go. And then we're going to take the provided glue. The glue is going to bond together. Now, this is what I was talking about with support on the seam. This is right there on the seam. It's good to go. And then I'm going to go ahead and put a generous bead of glue. Making sure that I put a good amount in between each of the seams. This glue will bond the two trays together so you don't have leaking in between. So you can see the importance of making sure that you have a good glue connection, otherwise it's going to leak. Okay, so I just make sure that all my spots are good, all my connections are good. Make sure you have a rag on hand so you don't do what I just did and make a mess on the floor. Okay, we're going to move forward, set our grease gun down at our next location. We're going to take our tray. We're going to set it right on top. Push it down into place. And then adjust it. make sure that it's over top of your next steel, making sure all those connections are good. We want to leave about a 1/4 inch expansion gap in between here. You'll see all the glue in between. You can take up, if you want to make it clean, you can take a little knife and kind of clean it all up. Another way to do it is just to completely push this together, making sure that that seam closes, and then pull back your expansion gap. So that way I created a seal, and then I pulled it back to create that expansion gap. I'm going to repeat this process. Down the line with all of my trays until I finish all the way on the end. That's the table. Thanks again for watching the video, guys. I hope that watching us put this system together is going to make your job easier while building. Always refer to your install guide before completing or watching this video to get yourself roughed in, and hopefully you get your systems built correctly and you have a little more space to work inside of your garden and your job becomes easier. Thanks again, guys.